Hi, I'm Patricia Grabarek.
And I'm Katina Sawyer, and welcome to the Workr Being Podcast. Today, Patricia has an article for us. Do you want to tell us a little bit about what we're going to be talking about today?
Sure. So we're going to talk about flexible schedules and how it impacts different age groups differently.
Ah, that's kind of cool. That's very interesting. So a little bit of like generational differences or not, maybe. Who knows what the results will be?
Well, they're not looking at generations specifically. They're looking at actual ages. So
Cool. That's
awesome. Been interesting. That's interesting too. But spoiler alert, it's good for everybody for the most part. But
nice.
There are some differences in terms of well-being outcomes based on what kind of age group-ish you're in.
That's awesome. That sounds very interesting. I like it. And I'm curious to learn more. And before we jump into that, happy 2021 officially. We are now recording in 2021, which is so exciting.
I know. It's so exciting. The last episode we recorded in 2020 leading into this fabulous new year. Hopefully it will be fabulous.
Yes.
Not like 2020. I mean, obviously 2021 is going to still have all sorts of COVID blah. But
yes.
hopefully overall we're moving in the right direction and things will be better. So fingers crossed.
Very true. Yeah. I saw someone shared an article today that was like some fan company recalls like thousands of fans because the blades are flying off uncontrollably. Oh my God. And they were like, happy 2021. Like things are not off to a good start.
That is terrible. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh.
I was like, but no, I do have high hopes for this year just because there's like a seeming like light at the end of a tunnel. You know what I mean? Like, like there's been so much uncertainty and there is no vaccine or there was no vaccine. There's no like way of combating this. No one's developed anything yet. And at least now, like we have a vaccine. There's, you know, a general sense that at some point this year, people like will widely have access to it. And so that at least even for me is just, you know, it calms the planner that I know we both are in me to say like, okay, well, it might be a while longer that we're inside and like things might be like this for a while longer this year, or even like most of this year, we might still be you know, in a similar circumstance as we were last year, but at least we know what's to come, which was like half of what I think was freaky about last year.
Yeah, I think last year it was the complete unexpected. Like this came out of nowhere, or felt like it came out of nowhere. Yeah. Granted, we all heard about it in January and in December, but we never really thought it was going to get to us and be this whole thing. And so, like, I think we just had no idea. I mean, if we go back to all of our episodes that we recorded in the early summer and late spring, it was like, well, maybe we'll be done with it. Maybe we won't be done with it. Right. We just like never knew. And it was just this roller coaster. Well, I feel like at least now, like we're all over it. We all want to be doing our normal things, but we have kind of gotten used to this weird state. And we can see, like I think it's not as like stressful always. I mean, there's definitely stress within it still, but not as much as I think initially. Or just there's less unknown.
Right, exactly. Like there's more clarity. I'm like, okay, probably by like late fall, hopefully everyone will have access to the vaccine, and then I'm just going to like roam the streets and never enter back into my house for like months.
Oh man. Well, I have to tell you that, now everyone on the podcast will also know this, but we were talking about you this weekend when we were hiking with our friends for New Year's, right? So we did a little hike and it was just 4 of us. We all had masks and we tried to be like as safe as possible. But, you know, at some point you've got to see some people every once in a while. It's just kind of crazy. So, and honestly, I think these were the first friends we've seen in a really, really long time. Yeah. But anyways, so we were hiking with them and we talked about you and we were saying how once this is all over, you and Brenda need to come out and finally meet these friends of mine. And we should do a big wine weekend. So that's what's going to happen. We'll all get vaccines. We'll all do wine weekend.
Yay. I love it. That's so fun. I'm so excited for that. Yes. That's the thing. Like you got to like think about what you're going to do when you're done. Like we even just booked, like it's refundable up to a week in advance. So like if it happens that we're not back to normal by late October, you know, we can reschedule it. But it's our 5-year anniversary this October. And I was like, we should just go somewhere like that's like close by that we know we could drive to. So like, you know, if you're just able to, you know, maybe we don't want to get on a plane yet, but we could drive and feel okay to be like in a hotel or whatever, then, you know, blah, blah. So anyway, we booked to like go to like a hotel near here and have like a nice dinner and stuff. And I was like, oh, like just even thinking about it, even though it's like 10 months away more, I was like, oh, that's nice. So I think like having things like this is the year of me like giving myself things to look forward to as well, because I feel like there was so much uncertainty before. You couldn't even like plan a thing, you know, you were like, I don't know, maybe this is just my life now. But now I feel like a little bit more comfortable planning, just at least having the idea that, okay, we have a little bit of a timeline going on here.
Yeah, I agree. I can't believe it's almost been a year since you were out here and I saw you last. Like in a couple weeks, it'll be a year.
It's super crazy. I was thinking about that too. Well, I was thinking about the fact that this will be, I mean, literally, let's say I don't get on a plane till the end of this year, let's just say. That will be the longest that I have ever not been on a plane, I think, like, since I was in grade school.
Wow. Yeah. I feel like that's probably the same for me.
Yeah, because it'll be like almost 2 years if it's like until like December.
Yeah, my last flight was in February of 2020. So
yeah, me too. So that would be like almost 2 years. Like I definitely in high school I was definitely on a plane at least twice. So that means that it must be since like grade school.
Yeah, I think that's probably the same for me.
It's bonkers. I was like,
so
I don't
weird.
even know. Yeah, it is so strange. But in a way, it's like, well, maybe this is, you know, maybe this time was good, like we've talked about before. And there's like a little bit of like nugget of learning in there that your own house and your own area and the things that you have to do around you are still nice. Like, I bet I wouldn't have done like a lot of things that I've done around here that, you know, I just wouldn't have had time, or at least like in our house, like I've made things have like little touches that I think I wouldn't even have time to think about. So I think that there's some stuff that comes from it, but it is really weird. And I am like, as soon as this hits and I can like go someplace, I'm going to be like, yes. And I'm just like, you know, like release from my home and like run around in the streets and just like be like, and like when we can hug people again, I'm just going to hug everyone I see.
Oh my gosh. I feel like I've promised everybody that I'm going to visit them as soon as it's over. So I'll just be traveling all over the world. Like literally, like people in London, like people all over the world. I've told them I'm going to visit them. So I'm going to be doing like a worldwide trip to see everybody. So that's going to be me. You'll be running around the streets and I'll be like hopping from airport to airport, be like, hi, person, next flight, like crazy.
Yes, it will be very interesting. And we're looking forward to doing more virtual stuff and connecting more virtually this year, because I think that was a good strategy. But at some point, we also are looking forward to connecting more with all of you, like listeners and readers and everybody that's out there that are connected in the Hive, because it'll be really nice to get to know more people this year as we are trying to connect more as our theme for this year. Yes. But that also means that towards the end of the year, when we're able to connect in person, maybe we'll even be able to connect that way too.
Oh my gosh, that would be so great. I want it so much. Okay, well,
our whole retreat will just be like, people, we're here.
Can you see me?
Great?
Can you see me? Oh my gosh.
Just everyone go around and touch the person next to them.
High fives. High five. Yeah. High five. It's
we're
like
all real. And we're all here in the same room. And that is all this retreat is about. No, but I do think it will be fun. So anyway, glad it's 2021. The year, hopefully, of the light at the end of the tunnel. I don't want to say that too early, because what if this episode doesn't age well? But I pray that it ages well. And one of the things that has been nice about 2020, at least for me and other folks who have more office type, corporate type jobs has been that there's been a lot more flexibility in how you set up your schedule. So if we're thinking about positives and negatives, that's a positive. And I'm curious to hear more about how that might have impacted people with regard to their age.
Fantastic transition.
Thank you.
I love it.
Thanks.
Yeah, so let's talk about this. I'm going to first tell you what the article is. And I have no idea if this author is actually Polish, but it's a Polish last name, so I'm going to pronounce it that way. And if they pronounce it differently, sorry. But it's written by Piszczek and Pimputkar in 2020. It was published in the Journal of Applied Psychology, and it's called Flexible Schedules Across Working Lives, Age-Specific Effects on Well-Being and Work.
Cool. Awesome.
Yes. So this article, like, they were really interested in understanding how age might be impacted by the flexible schedules in terms of things like physical health symptoms or subjective health perceptions, work-family conflict, how people were with work, depending on if they had flexible work hours and if age had an impact on that. So their main focus was just kind of thinking about the global workforce, right? So the workforce is aging. They talk a lot about how older workers are staying in the workforce longer as life expectancy goes up, and people are not retiring as early. And they used Germany actually in the sample of the study because Germany has an aging workforce, and they're kind of like ahead of the game, if you will, for what's happening in the U.S. Like their younger population is even smaller than ours is in the U.S. So they kind of are like seeing that they're going through some steps around aging workforce before the U.S. is. But based on our birth rates and things like that and the trajectory, we're kind of on the same path as Germany.
That's interesting.
Yeah. So they kind of decided that Germany would be a good place to start looking and understanding what might be going on with the older workforce.
That's awesome. So why do they think, just off the bat, kind of, why would we think that there might be differences in how people perceive or benefit from flexible schedules across different ages?
Yeah, so it kind of relates to some of the things that you and I have talked about a bit with like work-family balance and things changing over your life because of the things that are important to you in that moment in time. So it talks about how older workers have different needs and preferences than younger workers. There's been some research to show that aging is linked to different motivations and goals within both their work and non-work roles. So older employees, for example, are more motivated by things like achievement, and not necessarily by like compensation or like job title increases, right? So it's like achieving goals versus ambitions to reach next levels. There's still an interest in professional development and growth from older workers, but it's just like a slightly different perspective. And they base this on this theory called socio-emotional selectivity theory that basically says that as you age, your time horizon shrinks. And your time horizon is basically like how much time you have left in the workforce, right? If I start at 20, in theory, I'm going to have like 40 plus years left. If I'm in my 50s, I'm probably going to have like 15 years left in the workforce before I retire. So as your time horizon shrinks, then your goals and what you want shifts. So instead of thinking long-term career goals, older workers generally are more present oriented. They want emotional fulfillment in their work. So it's more about having a motivation towards, feeling fulfilled in different ways than the career trajectory that a younger person might be interested in.
Gotcha. So with this, you said it's called selective emotionality?
Socio-emotional selectivity theory.
Okay. Socio-emotional selectivity theory. Okay. So this theory is basically setting us up to maybe hypothesize that older workers would appreciate flexibility more because they have the ability to make time for more of those emotional opportunities? Or are they thinking it would make older workers feel less inclined to like those schedules because they're not as concerned about the job aspect in general or something like that?
So there's kind of conflicting thoughts out there in terms of like the types of findings people have found before. There's not a lot of work in this space, but their thinking was that they would prefer it because there's some evidence that suggests that age is related to things like autonomy, like wanting more autonomy in your work. Then, you know, so therefore, you know, like if you're younger, you probably want a little bit more guidance. You're still kind of figuring things out. So you may not want as much autonomy as somebody that's older and has been in the workplace for a while and probably doesn't need as much structure or guidance because they've been doing their job for a long time, or they, you know, have seen it all, right? So there's this sense that as you get older in the workplace, you're more likely to want more autonomy, and therefore flexible schedules are going to be more important for those individuals than the younger individuals. But again, this is kind of a big question. They didn't really know. There hasn't been research in this space. They think, I mean, we do know that older workers have different work-family structures, right? If you're in your 20s, 30s, or 40s, you probably have kids, or you might have kids. You might have older parents that you're taking care of. You might have all these other things going on. Once you get into, you know, your 60s, some people are still going to have older parents they're taking care of, but not everybody. Kids are going to be older generally, so they're going to be probably out of the house or a little more self-sufficient, so you're not going to be caring for them the same way. But you're still, now you might have grandkids coming along, or you might have a different, it's just your structure and your life is different than when you're younger. And so that just kind of makes them think that there's going to be some differences in terms of how this might impact people.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's interesting because it feels like on one hand, and you're saying the research in this area is kind of new and or mixed. And so, you know, we may not have an answer, pure answer to these questions right now, or it sounds like they're sort of surmising based on what's out there, what they think might happen, but they're not sure going into testing it. But it's kind of interesting because it's sort of like this idea of, okay, if older workers sort of appreciate the flexibility more because it allows them to get more, make more time for some of these more, this emotional fulfillment, or it's more motivational for them because they have more autonomy and flexibility over their schedule. There's also like the practical end of it, like you're saying though, which is like, well, I could see that. I could also see that workers that are more of, you know, the age where you would be more likely to have younger kids, maybe more family responsibilities, like just from a practical perspective, might prefer it more because they need the ability to flex around because they just have more standing commitments, basically. So I could kind of see it going in either direction, but it's interesting that they're thinking that older workers would prefer out of the gate based on what's around so far. I'm really curious to see what they actually found.
Yes. So let's talk about that. So this, as I mentioned, this study uses data from Germany, and there's a government research project that is called, the German Federal Government's Institute for Employment Research, and it's called the Linked Personnel Panel. And so they took data from this. It's a 3-wave data set. It had employer-employee surveys, like all these different like interviews and calls that they did to people. So a lot of these surveys are conducted via phone and done in 2-year intervals. So the data was collected in 2013, 2015, and 2017. I mean, there's thousands and thousands of people in this study. The way they analyze some of this data is a little complex because of some missing data issues, which I'm not going to get into here, but they had a ton of data, basically, to understand employees' perspective. So what they did is they used a few of the measures from that bigger study, if you will. So they looked at flexible work hours. So they asked people if they had them or not. So it's self-reported. That's something to note. But so it's self-reported whether or not somebody thinks they have flexible work hours. Then they looked at age, which was calculated by birth year and month. So it's really like actual age at that moment. They looked at sick days. So to understand whether or not having more flexible hours helps people take fewer sick days, which is a proxy for physical health. Then they also looked at subjective health perception. So asking people how they would describe their current health on a 5-point scale. They also looked at work to family conflict, so whether or not the demands of work interfere with their home and personal life. They looked at effective organizational commitment, so how committed you are to your organization, how emotionally attached are you to that organization. And then they also looked at engagement. So they had a few items on work engagement. So that's all the things they measured. A lot of stuff.
Did they control at all for how much money people made? Because I also would think some of that could be related. Like, for example, like if I'm making a really small amount of money, I'm probably less able to take sick days or have less sick days available to me, for example.
Yeah, so they looked at all sorts of other demographics, gender. They looked at whether or not you're married and have children. They controlled for that. Cool. They controlled for job type, how much physical labor your job has. So a lot of different things. So they try to control for as much as possible. Yep.
Okay, cool. So they're taking out all the noise that's associated with any of those things, and they're saying just purely, as pure as possible, how is flexible scheduling related to these outcomes?
Yep, exactly.
Cool. Okay, awesome. So what did they find?
So there's a lot of things they found because obviously I just mentioned a lot of things they measured.
Yeah.
So the first thing they found was that flexible work hours actually reduced the number of sick days in older workers, meaning 51. So in this case, it was age 51 or higher, but didn't have an effect on other groups. So it didn't matter how flexible your work schedule was as to whether or not you were sick or called out sick from other ages. But if you're 51 or older, you're less likely to call out sick if you had flexible hours.
That's very interesting.
Yeah. Okay, so that's finding one.
Yes.
Finding two. Flexible work hours improved the subjective health perception, so like how people perceive their health. Do they think they're healthy or not? In older workers, this is also the 51 and above. It had no impact on average age workers, which is kind of like that middle bucket. But this is the weirdest one. It had a negative effect on the health perceptions for younger workers, age 21 to 32.
That's interesting. I'll be curious to see how they unpack that. I was thinking that with regard to the sick days for older workers, it might be just that they're finding their job more motivating and exciting, so they're less likely to want to call out because they have more time to do those things that they want to do, whereas individuals that are younger might be using that flexibility, like I said, to be taking care of like practical tasks, or like they have a lot of standing commitments. So like their sick days, they're still going to get sick. And maybe even, the flexibility is good, but they're overworking in both domains or something like that because they have too much on their plate. So the more flexible their schedule is, maybe the more they're working on off hours or not disconnecting. Whereas for older employees, maybe they truly are using it for what it's meant for, which is to kind of take the time to, craft the job the way that you want it, and things like they're getting the positive benefits of the flexibility, but not filling in the off time with other things or overworking. I don't know if they talked about that at all, but it seems like it could be a suggestion.
I think you may have read this beforehand because literally what they said. Like they said that exact same theory, that they think that potentially older workers are actually using the time as it's meant to be. Like if they're taking a sick day, they're taking care of themselves, versus, and therefore like that's what they're doing. And then when it comes to their subjective health perceptions, they're not taking as many sick days. They're seeing themselves as more healthy. Now the younger generation is seeing themselves as less healthy, probably because like you said, there's a chance that with that flexible schedule, they're not balancing time for themselves. That flexible schedule, they're putting in other demands and other things, and trying to balance that work in other venues outside of their main job or in those flexible hours. So that's what their theory is as well. So that's kind of funny that you said that.
That's very interesting. I'm curious to hear, this might not be the next thing you were going to say, but I am curious to hear how it worked with regard to work family variables, because that would probably have something to do with the puzzle pieces of that story too.
So interestingly, the subjective health perceptions. So if I'm 21 to 32, I think my health is worse if I have flexible work hours. If I'm 30 to 52, my flexible work hours make me feel better, makes my work family conflict better. So I have less conflict. But that if that effect is not found for younger workers or for older workers. It's just kind of like
Hmm.
only the middle-aged workers feel like their work-family conflict is reduced because they have flexibility.
That's very interesting. I wonder, and I don't know, but I wonder if that's just due to, the age of children that people might be more likely to have at that time period, that like, there's not really a way to get around the demands of having really young children. I know people are having children later in life and that they also controlled for those kinds of things, but what was kind of their thought around why that pattern would show up for work family?
Yeah, I think it was similar to what you're saying, that middle-aged group tends to have more demands that are work-family related, whether it's children or not. Old aging parents is another area. There's it's just a different, even potentially owning a home versus not owning a home when you're younger, right? And your first time owning a home, which comes with its own set of messes, right? So I think that that's their theory too, is just in that middle aged bracket, if you will, the average age is what they're calling it, 30 to 52, there's where they see probably more likely to have some conflict between what they want in their personal lives and their work. When you're younger, I think we've talked about this before, but like sometimes when you're younger, you're first getting out in your career, you're really career focused, so even if you don't have balance, you aren't as bothered by that. And then when you're older, it's kind of the opposite, right? You don't have that same career ambition where you're not necessarily looking to get promoted tomorrow because you maybe only have a few more years and you really want to focus on the things you love.
Right.
So then it's not going to matter the same way either.
Okay. Gotcha. Okay. So that makes sense to me. I know there's affective commitment still left and engagement, right?
Yes. So those are interesting because for flexible work hours, everyone kind of seemed the same. So if you have flexible work hours, you're more likely to be committed to your company, regardless of your age. So everyone's kind of like, yeah, they like giving us flexibility. So cool. I like this company.
Right.
Which makes sense.
Yeah.
And then the engagement. So flexible work hours improved work engagement, but only till somebody got to age 57. After that, there was no effect. It wouldn't make it worse, but there was just not really an effect on work engagement as to whether or not you had flexible hours.
That's interesting. So did they say, so everybody feels like, thanks organization for giving me this flexible hours. I appreciate it. So I'll be more committed. From an engagement perspective, did they say that the effect sort of like bottomed out or topped out, I guess, that people generally, I know some research suggests that older workers are in general more engaged with their work than other age groups. Did they say it just sort of like reached a peak, like it couldn't have gotten much better? Or was it more that it just really, there's something about that age where it no longer matters as much if you have flexible hours?
Yeah, it just seemed like it no longer mattered. It was less of a kind of topping out. It was just kind of like, there's not really that much of a relationship here anymore.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. So taken all together then across all the variables, what are the kinds of takeaways that they think people should be drawing from their findings?
Yeah, that's a great question because there's so many different pieces here. I was kind of thinking about how can I frame this? Well, I think the good news is if you're an organization that cares about creating a good environment where people are committed to your organization and generally engaged, flexible work hours is important for everybody, right? So no matter what, you want to give people flexibility, and whatever form that is. Like they talk about flexible work hours, we've talked about this before. It could be you have only certain core hours you have to be online and everything else you kind of manage yourself, or, there's the other types of flexibility where it's really just you have to be on certain calls and meetings, but in between you work when you can and get your stuff done, and that's all that matters, right? Like there's so many different ways to define flexible work.
Yeah.
But the main takeaway is flexible work is going to make people like your company more, and it's going to make them more engaged. So that is big. And they found, because I told you that they did a survey multiple different time periods, they said like even 2 years later, like even if you in 2 years ago say that your company is flexible, you're going to still feel committed to them 2 years later. So it's like a big deal. So I think the huge takeaway, regardless of age, you really want to focus on creating that flexible work environment for your employees, period. So managers need to be able to do that. Leaders, organizations from a policy perspective, I think is huge. And then the one other thing I think would be a big takeaway is, from a health perspective, it seems to really have the biggest impact on the older workers, right? They're less likely to take sick days. They're more likely to report positively about their health. So probably, this is just a guess, and, there's not really any research backing up the statement, but if you're imagining an older worker may have more doctor's appointments because you typically, as you age, you have to do more like preventative tests and different things like that. Like these individuals that have flexible work schedules could probably do a lot more of that and feel better about their health because they're actually able to maintain their health as they're getting older. Whatever the reason, there seems to be a bigger effect on health and older workers. And so I think if you have an aging population, really focusing on flexible work hours, I think is going to be huge to help not only keep those folks committed to your organization, but also help them be healthier and well in the long run.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think it sounds like, generally, if you want people to feel positively about their jobs in the organization, good for all. If you want people to feel better in terms of wellness, and you have an older population, that makes sense. Do they have any suggestions about how to avoid the negative impacts for the younger employees that were found?
They didn't, but I'm going to give you mine.
Yeah.
So my suggestion for those younger workers is helping them see that those flexible hours are meant for self-care too, right? So I think that's where the other kinds of benefits that we stereotypically associate with like tech companies and like millennials and like all that buzzy stuff, like where you're giving people like free gym memberships and whatever, like maybe those are the types of things that you can encourage people to use that stuff during their flexible hours versus just like filling it with other demands and other work or working too many hours. So I think with the younger group, you may want to just keep an eye on them and make sure they're not like working, they have flexible work hours, great, but now they're working 60 hours and they don't need to work 60 hours, but they are because they're working at night and they're working all these weird times. So trying to, I think, just keep an eye on that group of folks that's like basically under 30, if you will. Yeah. Is probably important.
Yeah. And I would think also role modeling. So when you're starting on a job and you're new, you're probably looking around you to try to figure out, okay, I'm in the beginning of my career. I need to learn what it takes to get ahead here. And if you're not seeing, people the level above you or, the senior leadership actually doing that, like using the flexible time to attend to non-work things, then you're probably going to feel like, oh, well, it's important for me to focus on getting ahead. And if I can't get ahead, or it doesn't seem like I can get ahead by doing these behaviors, I'm not going to do them. If it seems like overwork is the only way to get ahead, then that's what people are going to do. But in the long term, it's not good for, your health and wellness. So I think that probably it would be good for people to actually really take this seriously. And if you have a flexible schedule, to not only work with people to make them feel okay about doing it, but like one of the best ways to make them feel okay about doing it is to be like, and I do that too, right, as your manager, or else it's not gonna maybe ring true.
Yeah, I actually really like, so you do this on your calendar, and I've seen a lot of coworkers do this too, where people block like their workout times.
Yeah.
So it's like yoga, or I've even seen someone put like a 30-minute like meditation on their calendar. Like if you're putting these flexible personal things in your calendar, some people are scheduling, they're gonna see, oh, like, Susan is not available right now because she's got a yoga class, and then you schedule around it, then you'll see like that's how people are using their flexible time, is to do some of these personal things when they can, like squeeze in some self-care stuff in the middle of the day, and that's fine. So I think making that a norm would get to your point, right? So if your manager, you can say what all you're going to say, but showing it, living it, and practicing it in this way, I think can really help that younger group where they're still kind of figuring things out, like you said, to know that it's okay to take, half an hour and go for a walk in the middle of the day. Not a big deal.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, plus people are seeing that on each other's calendars. And if you're talking about it or making it a point to make people know that, that's okay, that you take a little time for yourself in the middle of the day, as long as everything gets done that needs to get done and, you're doing a good job in terms of your performance, like, yeah, then take time that you need. And, if the work expectations are realistic, which could be another question to ask, is like, are we just expecting that people are going to do more things than there are hours in the day? But as long as your work expectations are realistic, allowing people to have that flexibility to use the time for things that they actually want to use it for seems to make sense and could help both reap the benefits for older workers, which already seem present, but also avoid the negative consequences for younger workers that seem to be kind of the only dark spot in all these findings.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And then again, from a organizational commitment perspective, like, you want your employees to be engaged, you want them to be committed to you, right? You want them to be doing the good work to help the business. So if that's your only motivator, this is a way to do it too.
Right. 100%. I think that sounds great. I'm really happy that you read this article. I think that this is really important because I hear a lot of people talking about how they think that flexible work schedules are like kind of a new wavy thing that like younger people want. And, they talk about how FaceTime is important. Some of that may be changing now that we were sort of forced into a virtual environment with COVID. But it seems like that's always the sort of narrative, is that like younger people want flexible schedules and lower FaceTime, and that older people are fine without doing that. But it seems like it's really beneficial for older workforces. So that's something I think is really interesting. And also that generally the effects are positive across the board. This isn't just a, millennial thing that younger people in the workforce expect for there to be flexibility, but it actually has really positive across the board effects for the organization, as well as for employees if managed appropriately. So I think that that's a really good takeaway for companies to know.
Yep. I love it. That's a great summary. So I'm glad that someone is doing this work. I think it is super interesting. And I agree with you. I really appreciate there's like a light shown on older workers that also want the same kinds of things, right? It's not just millennials being needy. Like, all workers want to be treated well, and they want to be given that flexibility and autonomy and being able to balance their life as they see fit. So I think it's really a great highlight, like you said, that this generational divide for these new agey type things is not really true in a lot of ways. And we see here that actually can have some big impacts on physical health for older workers.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's awesome. Thank you so much for bringing this to our attention.
Yeah, of course. I'm so glad to share it. And thank you all for listening. We really appreciate it. If you have any questions or thoughts or ever want to chat, you can always reach out to us at workrbeing.com, our website. You can email us at contact@workrbeing.com. And you can always find us on social at workrbeing on Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook. Thanks for listening. The Workr Being podcast is hosted by us, Patricia Grabarek
and Katina Sawyer, and produced by Allie Johnson.